take it slow. Wait for them to ask you who you know.
Now that Israel Adesanya is about to try to snap up Jon Jones' light heavyweight belt, their rivalry seems totally natural. But actually, in terms of how it all began, it is very strange. That's a point of real importance for Israel. He often mentions that Jon Jones started this whole thing.
Of course, I mean, he's the one that told TMZ, oh, I'd like to fight Israel Adesanya.
Why did you mention Jon Jones's name?
He mentioned my name first, before anything else.
Before anything else.
He got to keep my name out of his mouth.
Why? Okay.
Does a guy like Jon Jones spark any interest for you?
Yeah, 100%. I've already, he's the guy that started it. TMZ kind of poked the bear and he started it.
I tend to agree with Izzy here. I think if you were to pick a moment where the dynamic became totally hostile, it was Jones who pressed the nukes. But if you actually look at the receipts, they tell a much less straightforward story than Israel indicates. It's a little difficult to tell exactly where this began. Israel identifies the starting point as a TMZ interview where Jones supposedly called him out. Both men had prior to this been largely complimentary. This TMZ clip is how Izzy pins the whole thing on Jones. The issue with this is that it's just not a fair representation of the rivalry to suggest that this was the beginning of any animosity. Jones was respectful. He was asked if he saw any interesting prospects coming up. He highlighted Izzy, and that one day fans would want to see them fight. Izzy wasn't even #1 contender at that point. He had just beaten Anderson, never fought for a belt. And here, Jones was saying he had so much talent, he'd one day be standing opposite the greatest fighter in the history of the division above. So combined with the inoffensive tone of the interview, this was complimentary. There's just really no way around that.
Is there a young fighter or a couple young fighters that you're looking at that you go and you're excited to fight down the line?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Anderson Silva just fought against Israel Adesanya. I got a feeling me and him will eventually fight each other. I think the fans will want that eventually. I'd be excited for that challenge.
Izzy initially did take it as a compliment of sorts. He said the reason Jones made those statements is because he's smart.
It shows you how serious they're taking me, the smart ones, how much they know I'm a threat.
The following month, Israel did an interview for TMZ and was again asked about Jones. Israel's response was that Jones is the GOAT, but I've already killed one GOAT, I'm hunting the next.
So he's the GOAT right now, right? I already killed one GOAT. I'm hunting the next.
Now, Israel talks with a bit of flair, and I don't think there's anything too aggressive there. But let's try to look at it from Jones' perspective. At this point, he's only ever been complimentary of Izzy. He does a respectful interview discussing Israel as a prospect and outlining how he thinks fans are going to someday be clamoring for them to fight. But then Israel does an interview saying he's killed one GOAT, now he's hunting the next. I don't think it's as clear-cut as Israel makes it sound, and I can see why Jon might have taken things the wrong way.
And we're in the fight business, so when someone mentions your name, you want to retaliate, and we're fighters, so things get steamy real fast.
But I think where things really kicked off is the following. 2 days after his killing GOATs comment, Izzy went through hell with Gastelum, and in the aftermath, Jones made a couple tweets from which I don't think there was any coming back. My man had a toe-to-toe kickboxing match with a short, stubby wrestler. There's only one Jon Jones, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing but respect for Kelvin. Dude almost beat a kickboxer without throwing a single kick. You guys can believe the hype if you wanna. I've seen all I had to see. Now, there's multiple things going on there. Firstly, when he mentions there's only one Jon Jones, it's pretty clear that the comparisons of the two got under his skin. He's also criticizing his performance, suggesting his kickboxing pedigree isn't all it's cracked up to be, and he punctuates the whole message by calling Adesanya hype. I think this is where Jones really forced the issue. Israel would later characterize Jon as a bully, and Jon did pick a moment where although Adesanya won and showed tremendous heart, he looked beatable. And by a guy like Gastelum, Jones picked a moment where the gap between them seemed widest to put the boot in and escalate the whole thing. Israel avoided the topic in the post-fight, but by Monday morning he had some choice words for Jones that would pretty much characterize the next 18 months.
He's picking the time when I'm supposed to get the most shine to come at me because he's irrelevant. No one really cares about him. I'm everything he wished he was. I'm everything he wished he would have been when he was beat. Oh, I want to thank God for, meanwhile he's in the bathroom at whatever time. I've been bullied my whole life, man, even in high school. And now, look, I didn't peak in high school. I've not even peaked yet. So when I peak, he's going to get this.
So there you have them. Those are the receipts. I don't think they're exactly clear, but I would say that the moment the dynamic shifted from a normal, healthy sporting rivalry to mortal enemies was Jones' tweets after the Gastelum fight. An obvious question is, if the receipts paint a slightly more ambiguous picture than Israel would have you believe, why does he always bring them up? I mean, he mentions them every second interview. When you combine it with another thing he constantly repeats, which is that he only talks about Jones when he's asked, it does make sense.
You guys are the ones asking me this question. If not, I wouldn't be talking about it. I wouldn't have even brought his name up if you guys didn't mention because of what he said.
Jones started it, and I only talk about him when asked, are very significant points in the context of the major practical issue that's really at the heart of the whole conflict. Israel has offered many explanations as to why Jones behaves in the manner he does.
I've said this before, if you had to beat me, you got to do it yesterday. Because, Luke, you know this, every single fight, I'm getting better. And there's only one reason he called me out. Because I know he's a man of challenges. He likes challenges. I'm no easy fight. But he knows if you want to get me right now would be the time while I'm only a year and some change in this game.
In high school, when the freshman comes in and starts taking all the shine, the senior is like, oh, who's this motherfucker? Like this other skinny black kid that's taking all the shine when he was the one doing that in the first place. Then he fucked himself up by fucking around and tarnishing his own legacy.
He is jealous. He sees the freshman that's fucking taking all the shine. He sees the guy that's the new dog in the yard. And they're intimidated, they're jealous, and they don't know how to act.
But anytime I fight, he's always saying something stupid, trying to prod. I don't know if to steal the spotlight, but catch some of my shine, if you will. Like I told you, he's a clout trout, 100%. Kingfish clout trout. Bar none, 400-pound clout trout.
So his major theories are jealousy, Jones is an irrelevant clout trout trying to steal the spotlight, and that Jon wanted to opportunistically catch him early. There may be truth to all of them, but I think he nailed it when he said the following.
He just sees I'm the big money fight right now for him, and I don't need him, he needs me. He's been fighting all these middleweight rejects and looking
When Israel started saying Jones needed him, I thought he was crazy. He hadn't even defended his belt. But he's exactly right. When it all kicked off, Izzy had all the options in the world. He had a who's who at middleweight. Whitaker, Romero, Costa, Souza was still in the mix, Cannonier and Till were potential contenders. These were all legacy-building fights. And Israel has always spoken about the middleweight contenders with tons of enthusiasm. Yeah, he can talk some shit, but the guy respects his division.
Yeah, what do you think? I want Romero just because if Paula's not going to fight. I want Till to win. I like new challenges. I already beat Kelvin, so he's a gorilla, King Kong in New York. I like to see him do some work. I'm telling you, Cannonier is a dark horse, man, amazing. And I know he's a tough motherfucker. That's why I even said to Jorge, he's a bad motherfucker, and I'll fight him along with all the other bad motherfuckers in my division.
Jones, on the other hand, has had very little lately that gets people excited. He said himself that he hasn't even been interested in his recent opponents. Probably didn't even know some of their names. And that's been at the center of the whole thing. Jones trying to wobble Israel off course and into a premature light heavyweight collision. Because however long Israel decided to remain at middleweight, by his own admission, Jon had nothing to get excited about. Now, Israel does 10 times the media Jones does. So people could look at this thing and say, it's a bit of a pussy move to talk shit about Jon all day long, but not move up and fight him. And that's exactly Jon's spin on the whole thing.
People can eat up what he's saying, but the truth of the matter is he's scared today. Oh, he'll be scared in 2020 as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so my guess is that Israel is kind of preempting that criticism by repeatedly laying out those parameters. I'm not being a pussy. Jones started this thing, and I only talk about him when asked. In reality, though, it's always been very clear Israel isn't afraid to move up. One of the great things about him is the clarity of his vision for his future. He's always been adamant about clearing out his contenders, continuing to evolve, and by the end of 2019 he was offering a rough timetable for the Jones fight. One which for his part, he appears to be sticking to closely.
Time will come. His time will come. I said Raider Stadium 2021. If he wants to fight me right now, come to middleweight. I'm just saying I got to defend my belt a few more times. I've defended it once, my last fight. I want to defend it against these killers at middleweight. But if he can come down to middleweight, jump the queue because he's the champ at 205. He's one of the GOATs, right? But I will jump up regardless in 2021 to 205 just for some fun. Whoever the title, I'll just fight whoever the title holder is at that time.
He simply flat out refused to allow Jones to dictate his career.
I've written my own story this far. I'm never going to let anyone force my hand, you know? And he's the one saying, oh, is he ready? Maybe you should ask Eugene. Motherfucker, ask yourself, are you really ready to move up to heavyweight? Because you've been teasing that since 2013 and you ain't done shit. So he's trying to push for that fight. But like his teammate said, she said, you know, I'm writing my own story. I saw it on Ariel on Instagram. I'm writing my own story, and I'll never let anyone else write my own story or something to that nature. That's me. I've been saying you can't force my hand. You can't you can't Canelo me. You can't force my hand. I've already told you when I'm gonna whoop your ass.
Because so much of the rivalry has taken place on Twitter, there are a couple tweets worth mentioning. One that Adesanya got a lot of backlash for was when he brought up Jones' mother. Now, it was in response to Jon talking about Adesanya's father. After the Paulo Costa fight, Israel discussed how his father came up with a critical piece of the puzzle.
My dad, shout out to Oluwa Femi, the big dog, big fem dog, Adesanya. He said, I'm gonna blind him. I'm gonna blind him with my jab. And when he's compromised with one eye and I take the other eye out, if he sees a pink hue, he'll know where my head is. He'll know, okay, that's where my head is, and he'll just aim for the pink hue. So I was like, you're right. And like a good boy, I listened to my dad. He's a smart man.
Jones commented on Twitter, I'm curious to hear what his father tells when he asks about fighting me. I wonder if his father believes he's ready. Eugene definitely doesn't. Adesanya responded with, my pops already told me how I beat you. Trust me, he knows. Your mom would be disappointed in who you've become. Now, he got a lot of backlash for that one. Understandably. Jones' mother passed away in 2015, so it's not good to be bringing that up. But Israel wasn't exactly dancing on a grave here. He's basically saying Jones' mother had moral standards against which a lot of Jon's recent behavior wouldn't stack up. The insult wasn't that his mother has passed away, it said Jon's a fuck up.
I don't give a fuck if your mom's dead. I'm sure she was a beautiful woman, a beautiful soul, but I don't give a fuck if she's dead. Don't mention my dad.
Izzy's defense was that Jon had crossed some huge line by mentioning his dad. His point was that it's not up to other people to judge how he responds when people cross his lines.
And people say, oh, you should have mentioned his dad instead. It's not up to you to decide what I do. You mention my family, that's open season. You're lucky I didn't come for other members of your family.
Which is a fair point, and I really like the way Izzy went on the offensive there. You know, unless you're unambiguously wrong, I think that's the best way to deal with that type of backlash. But Israel is the one who brought his father up as having contributed the master stroke at changing his hairdo. So Jones was referencing something Adesanya brought up in the context of the fight business. I don't think Jon crossed any reasonable lines there. Realistically, I don't think the exchange was too vicious on either side. You could say Izzy went overboard, but I don't think it was a hangable offense, and he handled the backlash well. There was another notable exchange where Adesanya got Jones to admit he was hiding under the cage, which had been speculated about for years. Fun facts, I napped under the cage in 2010 because I didn't want to waste gas going home. Jonathan stayed under the cage to hide from USADA during a random drug test. This is facts. Y'all must have forgot. Jones responded, I was hiding from Nevada State Athletic Commission, not USADA. And that was years ago. I had just smoked a blunt and was afraid I would fail my test for weed. That's the actual truth. Now everyone knows. Now this was just fucking atrocious from Jones. The whole thing was Israel drudging up an unsubstantiated nothing rumor from 6 years ago? I think it reflected worse on Israel that he was going back that far. I mean, he was flogging the memory of a dead horse. Nobody cared about that. But then Jon comes out and admits he hid under the cage, but says it was for the most innocuous reason possible. He may as well have said he dropped the jelly bean, it rolled under the cage, and he fell asleep while he was looking for it. I mean, it just sounds like a case of trickle truth. First he denied it, now he's saying it was weed. In a couple years there'll be some testosterone involved, And eventually he'll tell us where he hides the bodies. It just sounds like bullshit. Jesus Christ, very silly admission from Jones. A lot of their other tweets have been kind of a basic trading of insults. I won't run through them all, I'll spare you. But there is a bit of a pattern developing. I've said before that I think Jones is probably the most underrated trash talker in his sport. I still think he has the single greatest comeback I've ever heard.
I beat you after a weekend of cocaine.
I thought that first time was the first time you did cocaine.
I had
So wait, you had been doing cocaine.
I had two.
Okay, I get your super
I had
drugs.
two great
Congratulations.
back-to-back weekends. Cocaine one, your ass the next. It was great. That's a month for the ages.
Very good. And despite all his deleting, I think it translates well to Twitter. A lot of his better tweets fall into two categories. Sometimes he kinda has a real big brother juvenile type humor. For example, Israel was saying he was gonna have to talk to Eugene before moving up to light heavyweight. Jones commented, "Has Eugene given you permission to come out of the closet yet?" But other times he's straight up sinister. "I've never been knocked out or even dropped in my career. I'll take this boy down and break something on his body. Fact." That's a great use of language. It's ambiguous. I'll break something. Might be an arm, could be a toe, might be his fucking neck. But something's gonna break. Sinister intentions communicated economically. On the other hand, Israel's not at all one note in his interviews about Jon, but his tweets are almost entirely one note. His insults overwhelmingly revolve around Jon's mistakes, which, to be fair, is unavoidable. It's incredibly low-hanging fruit. Now, you might think these tweets are cherry-picked, but that's actually not the case. On Twitter, Israel places enormous emphasis on Jon's mistakes. "I want all the picograms of freshly squeezed juice. I have never used dick pills in my life. My balls still produce testosterone as they should, because I have never taken testosterone from any external substance. How many times has he been arrested? How many times you pissed hot? How many times you had your belt taken off you? You never learn, you pulsing peaked-o pussy." Now there's a lot more, and I already mentioned the ones about hiding under the cage and Jon's mother being disappointed. Now, just to be clear here, I don't want to mischaracterize Israel. He hasn't been like this in interviews, but what I've just read is a fair characterization of his attitude towards Jon on Twitter. Now, if you go back and watch some of the press conferences between Cormier and Jones, Cormier made a lot of very valid criticisms of Jon. He assessed Jones in ways that turn out to be prophetic. But in my mind, even though he was right and being totally fair, Cormier used self-righteousness and moral judgments as a shovel and a pick to dig himself into a deep, deep hole against Jones. I mean, now, Cormier has to be one of the most universally liked guys in the sport, and one of the better role models, but he got chewed up. The crowd hated his ass. I remember a really terrible moment for Cormier, where you kind of had to feel sorry for the guy. He made an explicit moral comparison between himself and Jones, while basically appealing to the crowd for support. So in the same sentence, Cormier was appealing to be liked, while doing one of the very things that was, in my opinion, making him unlikable.
As I address these people in here, I say to you, guys, I've been sober. I haven't done all these things. I haven't wrecked my vehicle. I haven't been suspended. I didn't get stripped from my championship. I didn't do all those things. Guys, these are normal things that adult human beings do. You cheer this guy for saying he's not going to do these things anymore. I have done this my entire life, but you boo me. Thank you. Thank you.
Could someone bring Daniel some Kleenex, please?
That one line and the crowd's reaction, that was a moment where you just thought, that pretty much sums this whole thing up. One characteristic that is absolutely unlikable is self-righteousness. People just do not like that. Now, Israel doesn't really come across like that too much in interviews. He has compared himself favorably to Jones, saying he's gonna do what Jon did but do it the right way kind of thing. And of course, he does discuss Jon's mistakes.
I could barely finish a fucking sandwich. Could barely finish a whole camp without some fucking drama with USADA or something outside the cage, the guy's a piece of shit, and he knows it. That's the thing. I'm not perfect, bro. I'm a piece of shit in my own right, but the difference between me and him is I learn from my mistakes, and I make sure they never happen again. That's the big difference between me and him. But he's a piece of shit through and through. He never learns from his mistakes and repeats them over and over again, and that says a lot about him as a person.
Which I think is a fair point, actually. So I'm not necessarily saying he's headed in the same direction as Cormier. But one thing that is concerning is that Israel has said he's got clips. The streets is talking.
It's not the first time Jones has had any issues with guns that everyone knows about. Trust me, I know some shit, but, you know, that's for me to know and people to not know.
I know some things. The streets is talking, and everyone knows, you know, what's up behind the scenes. So,
all right, say something stupid. He knows I got clips. I'm ready for him.
In other words, he's got some dirt on Jones that's not in the public sphere, and he's basically threatening to drag those things into the public sphere. Now, I don't think anyone thinks that's cool. It almost sounds like Izzy has a private investigator rummaging through Jones' trash. Aha! A crack vial.
If you want to really get dirty, trust me, I've got receipts. I can get down and dirty. I got fucking foot soldiers in New Mexico. They tell me what's really happening. He has no fucking idea. This is war. I'm a general in this bitch.
So now he's not just talking about Jon's mistakes. Now he's kind of threatening to start telling tales. I'm not trying to suggest what Izzy should or shouldn't do, but I think there's a chance if he keeps talking about airing Jon's dirty laundry, or he airs Jon's dirty laundry, it might not net him the results he expects with viewers. And there's also the side that with Jones, it's not like throwing shit at a wall. It's more like pissing into a river. You know, unless he has DNA evidence linking Jon to a series of murders, what could he possibly say that would reflect worse on Jones than it would on him for telling those tales? Not much, in my opinion. So with Jones, we know what we're gonna get. But Izzy is a bit more of a wild card in that sense. If his interviews are indicative of how he'll interact with Jon, I think he'll be perceived well. But if they get into trading insults, it might be more like Twitter, in which case I could see Israel losing the crowd by sliding in his self-righteous territory. Anyway, it's an impossible thing to predict. Every dynamic is unique, and there's also the simple fact that right now, Adesanya is a much more exciting fighter to watch. But it'll be interesting to see them interacting in front of a crowd. And it'll be especially interesting to see how Israel comes across in that scenario. Overall, though, I think this rivalry has reflected well on Israel. You know, you can debate about where it started or who's to blame, but one thing that's for sure is that everything that's transpired since then could be framed in the context of Jones trying to bully and manipulate Israel into changing his plans, deviating from his vision, and taking the fight earlier than was advisable. That's the one battle that has already taken place. Israel has balanced standing up to Jones, making it clear he's not one bit afraid of moving up in his own time, and continue to keep his eye on the ball, smashing the fuck out of middleweights. For me, the strongest line that has come from Izzy is that Jon basically cannot escape now. He picked a fight, and now he couldn't escape if he wanted. If Jon moves to heavyweight, Israel has said he'll follow him up. If Jon loses, it's not ideal, but now, that doesn't make a difference to Israel.
I've never given a fuck about weight. Since when? It's never been an issue for me. I've been a heavyweight in boxing and kickboxing. I'll do it again in MMA, so it's never been an issue about weight. You can try and run to heavyweight, but I'll chase him down, I'll hunt him down if I have to.
Now, one thing we know about Israel is he takes making statements about his future very seriously. And he's made it abundantly clear that not only could the fight happen, but that it will happen, regardless of the circumstances. And I think that is a tremendous show of confidence. The whole thing reminds me of that scene in A Bronx Tale, where Sonny politely asks the bikers to leave the bar. They tell him to go fuck himself, and so Sonny calmly locks the door and says, "Hey, now yous can't leave."
Now you just can't leave.
You know what? I don't even care what he does. Like, I'm still coming for him. Like, regardless when he wins, when he loses, whatever, I'm coming for him. That's a fight I want because I just want to prove a point. That's the thing. I just want to prove a point.
Everything Adesanya has done has been calm and calculated. Jones picked a moment to escalate their beef when the gap seemed the widest, when Adesanya didn't look like a credible threat. Israel has made many prophetic statements in his career, and he stuck a pin in a calendar for 2021. Since then, the gap appears to have narrowed. After Jones' controversial win over Reyes, if Israel can dispatch of Yan in an impressive fashion, then Jones' prediction will undoubtedly come true. The fans will be clamoring for that fight, and Israel, having stuck to his guns and taken his time, will never have seemed a more credible threat.
Shaku, 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 shaku,